Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jon Myer podcast powered by Myer Media. Now, we have a special episode happening here at AWS reInvent 2024. A good friend of mine that I got to say, Chief Evangelist at AWS, Jeff Barr. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
John is happy to come back for the second year running.
Like we were talking about, this has to be a tradition. I think every year reInvent, by the way, you're not going anywhere. And if you ever are a chance that you do retire, you're coming out for this. We'll bring you out for this show.
That sounds good. And I've promised everybody that whenever I decide will be my ultimate reInvent before I retire, I will come back with bright purple hair. So that will be the signal.
So when we see the post coming into it that you have bright purple hair, should we prepare ourselves for the announcement or?
I haven't quite decided if will it be the slow fade or will it be the kind of like, I'm done, I'm out of here, pull the plug and go? We'll see. I still really enjoy what I'm doing every day. And even though, as we'll talk about, it's evolving a tiny bit, the idea of digesting cool stuff, understanding it, and then explaining it to people, it never gets old. It's still really enjoyable. And the thing that's awesome about reInvent is to get to meet my customers and my audience. And I don't want the like, all I want from them is to hear that what I did is valuable to them. If anything I did, I created, inspired them or helped them to like further their journey with some education or an insight or helped them to do something new, I love to hear those stories and I never get tired of hearing them.
Well, if you never get tired of hearing it, I know I say it on almost, I swear, a lot of our episodes is that's how I got started. I came across your blogs and I recreated the stuff that you recreated, and I was like, this is pretty good. And I followed, and that's how I got started in AWS. So, if at anything, you're definitely making a difference, all the blogs that you do.
It's always good to hear, and to sometimes hear that things you wrote 5, 10, even 15 years ago are still having some kind of a positive effect. It's hard to find something that could be more rewarding and more impactful.
Let's talk about the blogs a little bit. So AWS Blog started, 20 years ago?
2004, in November of 2004, which seems like ages ago, because I guess it actually was. Way back then, I was just starting to work with Andy Jassy as he was working to write his famous narrative that turned into the AWS that we know today. I was already the evangelist for our earlier services, things like the Amazon Product Catalog API and a few other early services that we had. And I already had the evangelist title. And as I'm reading his narrative, I realized that we're going to be scaling up the number of different offerings. I started thinking about better ways to communicate with an audience. And so I had been discussing with Andy this idea of let's create a blog and let's use this as a information sharing vehicle. At that point, blogging was mostly kind of personal and self-expression. There wasn't an example like a point to of another company using a blog as a technical marketing vehicle, if you will. And so it was a little bit challenging to really describe what I wanted to do. And at a certain point, I simply put the first 2 posts online and said, here's our blog. What do you think? And then at that point, it really resolved a lot of the mysteries and there were a lot of questions of like, what if this could happen? Or what if this particular opportunity falls through? Or maybe this kind of trouble occurs? We kind of solved all that by simply doing it and just jumping right in and say, okay, it's here. We're going to do our best and learn as we go. And 20 years, 3,300 plus posts and 1.5 million words later, you kind of look back and say, wow, that was pretty amazing to get to be a part of starting from nothing and creating something that so many people know and benefit from.
Jeff, your blogs are what captivated me is because they were personal. You talked to the audience, right? You were going through this problem. You were building it, and I did this, and it didn't work, right? It wasn't always that everything worked from start to finish. I had to go through it and I tried it myself, and I changed some things. And I think that's what resonated with the audience.
Being real turned out to be absolutely essential. And it wasn't some conscious decision of a lot of different ways to do it. I do remember thinking in the early days about the voice. Was it coming from the company or from a team or from a person? And ultimately, it just felt the best to come from an individual. And this idea that you do something and you put your name on it, a little bit to get your identity out there, but more to actually take responsibility for what you're putting out there. If you're writing behind the scenes for a company and no one actually outside knows where it came from, you could see the temptation to maybe take a shortcut or two and make it not as awesome as you need it to be. If you put your name on it, your entire reputation rests on every post, and it's up to you to keep upholding that reputation over and over again with each piece of content that you create.
Jeff, did you ever think that you would become this well-known person and writing the blogs and they would become so important to everybody?
No, no, and no, not ever. I do remember at a certain point, just a couple years in, I was out to dinner with my family, and someone came up to me and asked if I was the Jeff that was writing the blogs. And that first time you get recognized in public, and the funny thing is, when people would come up at first and say, "Are you Jeff?" I had this really strange fear, and the strange fear was that someone had actually read something in my blog, and this kind of goes back to what we said earlier. They read something in my blog and it wasn't quite perfect, and they were going to tell me how their startup crashed and burned because my blog post was inaccurate. I have no idea where that came from, but that drive to make sure that I never let anybody down has what has kept me going. And I insist on absolute accuracy. And when I'm working with a team, and sometimes the team will say, "Well, you can fuzz this a little bit because it's marketing." And I think, no, it's my name there. It's
Yep.
my audience. It's my customers. I am going to make sure that we give them every last detail correctly. If that means I need to go and talk to the engineers, or if that means they need to show me architectures or code, I'm totally happy to dive deep on that side with them. And the teams actually respect that a lot. And what I'll often do when I'm reading the description, what we call the PRFAQ for something new, I'll read it, I'll understand it, I'll create my mind map to make sure I have a good structure of all the different things that are in there. And I'll think really deeply about it, and I'll try to make sure I'll almost challenge myself to make sure I deeply understand it. And I'll ask the team relevant but really tough questions that are usually the kind that say, "We'll get back to you because we need to actually go research that in great detail." Because I want to make it very clear that I do have the technical background, but that I also really care about getting these details just right. So I almost, as a point, try to ask a very hard but useful question to make sure that they know I'm taking them very seriously.
Jeff, I like how you take so much pride in just getting this right for everybody that's reading it, understanding it. You're not just, okay, I got this, first one pager. I can go ahead and write this blog off of it. You really dive into it. You actually request access to the services in order to build
We
it to
we
walk through.
always, within the entire blog team, we always tell the service teams, "Well, we love you a lot, but we don't believe a single word that you say." So we have to experience firsthand these actual
That's
services
great.
in the closest way possible to the form that the customers will get them. And that gives us the authenticity and the credibility. It also gives us this unique point of view where we're often the first ones outside of the team itself to see the service. We get to experience it. We'll get to see it in its rough form as they're still kind of buttoning it all up and getting the final permissions and roles and console set up. But we get to see it in this nearly finished form. It also leaves this little tiny time window where we can give them some feedback and say, we're fairly good at this, and we're using your service. Most of it's awesome. We're a little bit stumbling on these bits and pieces here. Give some thought to fine tuning some of this, and that privileged position of being able to give that feedback and to represent our customers also is an awesome part of being part of the news blog team.
Jeff, 20 years of the blog. Are you still doing it? What's next? What's happening here?
All right. So we kind of informally announced, and we'll kind of make it a bit formal here, I guess, is I've done my 20 years, and I'd several years ago told my managers and everybody that 20 years felt like a really nice kind of a dotted line, say,
Nice even number. Why not?
been there, done that, right? The
Yeah.
next one is 25, and I'll be like ancient by the time we get to 25. So 20 seemed like a really awesome point to say, I've got a wonderful team I've been working with. I've been reviewing their content. I've been giving them a tiny bit of guidance, but the team is awesome. I just met with them earlier today, and I said, I'm going to be back here in 10 years, and I know for sure you're going to have continued to be doing amazing work, and I'll be reading it from afar. My thinking now is, so for 20 years, I've been writing about these services. In the very early days, I was probably a competent builder, and I could actually create things with these services. Bit by bit, the marketing side has taken over, and my technical competence has kind of faded into not oblivion, but it kind of feels dated. And what I'm thinking for maybe the last act of my career at AWS is kind of a back to builder moment, and spend more time with individual services, individual collections of services. And actually, instead of having them go rushing past me in a blur and I only really get a few hours with them, get to spend some deep time with individual services and legitimately imagine cool things and build cool things. I haven't thought this through a lot. And honestly, I said, I'm going to get to reinvent. and that will be the actual dotted line before and after. And now every time I explain what I'm thinking to somebody, I've been refining it as we go, which is kind of fun to do, right? I wanted to make sure I got to reinvent just focused on the current and not say, okay, been there, done that, and I'm already thinking next. I wanted to really arrive here with a full head of steam for the things that we're already doing. And we wrapped up strong. I think I did 15 posts for reInvent, which is a nice number to be able to do. And looking forward to kind of stepping a bit off of the news blogging treadmill. It's a great treadmill, but after 20 years on that treadmill, you're like, wow, I'm really fit, but I'm really tired. And so going in depth more on fewer things, I think is the way I'd like to think about it.
When we were talking before and you were defining what's next, what are you doing next and what are you writing on, you're like, I haven't really figured out. Every time I say it, I revamp it. This is really, and I start to understand really more as I say it out loud, what I'm going to do next, what's happening next. And I like that you're going to be focusing, I don't want to say on a specific service, but specific areas. Is there any that are really truly interesting to you that you want to focus on in general, or you kind of like want to dive into?
It's kind of everything, and I've always wanted to play very, very fair with all the service teams, and
That's very hard to do, considering
really
the
is.
amount of services.
I'm often asked in a situation like this, they say, so Jeff, of all the services, which one is your favorite? And that's a great way to make one friend and N-1 enemies. And you have to, but I legitimately enjoy each one as I'm working on it, and I'm fully immersed in that service and learning about it and writing about it as I write it. And so I wouldn't ever say that I have one particular thing that is my favorite. I'm really intrigued by serverless and by event bridge and step functions and maybe building nice, cool apps out of nice, tiny little interesting pieces I can define and build incrementally. I definitely want to use Q Developer to help me to actually like regain my skills. So looking forward to doing that as well. And this isn't just, I'm not going to do this quietly. I'll definitely document all my steps, and it'll almost be like, take this person who's been in the industry for a long time, been a developer, got kind of succumbed to being a marketing person, I guess, and then says, okay, you know what? It'd be kind of fun to do a little bit of a personal reset and regain some skills and learn a whole set of new ones in the process.
Are we looking at a new blog series coming out?
I haven't figured out the form yet. I don't think what I do fits in the news blog. And again, I'm literally thinking.
Yeah, you're spitballing it right now. So you can have this transcript when you're done.
I don't know if it belongs in the news blog because it's not quite news. Yep. I don't know if I need to create a whole new blog from scratch. Probably will stick with written content because I found that recorded video content is just not my thing. I love interviews like this where we're live and discussing. Recorded content that is rehearsed, for some reason, it's much harder to do recordings than it is to be live. I can't understand why, but recordings are just not my thing.
There's a requirement during a recording, one with some scripts and the certain values has to be portrayed across during it. And we can't go where the passion takes us. This conversation, well, like we don't have any notes here. We're just going with the flow. This is where you get a feel for the guest, and we can just have that natural conversation.
The go with the flow is so much easier and so much more fun. And another thing I love to do, and I'll ramp up as well. On Fridays, I've been doing the news segment for AWS On Air. And that's a live stream. There's a little bit of prep because I pick my news items so we can share out the links into the stream. Other than that, a couple notes, and then turn on the camera. It's your turn. Go. Say your piece in 5 or 7 minutes. So much easier. If I had to record that, it would take all day to come out with a result that I'm sure would not be as good.
I think it would be cool for some of the services that you dive into, and I'll just use EventBridge as an example, and we're not just saying that that's centered around it, but you actually get to interview them, and it doesn't have to be video, like a little podcast interview, the audio that goes with it. Hey, this is what I was checking out, and you put the other person like, listen, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but you get the person who's great that just wants to talk about EventBridge and some of the things you found out and discussed in short form, because now you get to be on the other side and interview them because you played with it and ask some of the questions.
Exactly. And again, thinking as I go, I'm only going to work with released services.
Yep.
It's fun to work with things ahead of time, but there's this interesting sense where you're a bit living in the future and you're always using things a week or a month before customers get to see them. And you get this almost time dilation effect where You're like, I've got this, but the rest of the world doesn't,
Hmm.
and I'm not that special that I should have it. But at the same time, I need to use it ahead of time, but I can't tell anybody about it. So I want to do things that as I'm working on them, so, "Oh, I'm working with this and this and this," and not be able to have to keep so many secrets about what it is that I know and I'm working on.
Well, then they can follow along. So you went through it. There's your blog.
Precisely.
You played around with it. It's live. It's not saying preview. General availability is already here. You can actually dive into it.
And if I had to pick something from what I've done with all the news blogging, that idea that I do want the audience to follow along, and I always make a very subtle shift where I'll in the beginning of the post says you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. So I'm enabling them by referring to them directly. But then I shift into the demo mode and I say, well, I did this and I did this and I did this to kind of say, well, I'm not just saying what you could do, but this is what I actually did. And it's a very subtle thing. I'm sure if we had like a high school English teacher review this, they say, well, you got to pick your tense or your model, or I don't even know what you call it, but it's either I or you, and pick one and stick with it. But that doesn't actually work right for the way I like to communicate.
Jeff, I know you said you're kind of like, I want to say for your portion of it, wrapping up your section of the AWS blog and moving on to other things. It's continue on. It's got a whole team. You've been mentoring. Everybody's been working together. I don't know if people understand how much effort you put into all the releases and everything that comes into reInvent. I know you're like heads down from like September on. And that's usually like beforehand. I'll be like, hey, Jeff, if you want to jump on an audio, it's, a video, a podcast, we can do it in August. Other than that, I'll see you at reInvent. And that's like months away. But they don't realize like you were putting in like 14-hour days
Oh,
to get this
exactly. So
done.
I had a work trip to Peru and Argentina in late September. From there, I flew to Istanbul for my son Andy's wedding. I got back from Istanbul on October 1st, and I started the next day, started in on reInvent, and I've probably worked 6.5 days a week since then to make sure that we had all this great content. I did not ignore my family any one of those days. I always see my kids. I always see my grandkids multiple times a week. But I was also hard at work getting all this content ready. I would say that stepping off this bit of a treadmill, it does mean that I won't be as busy in reInvent times, which means that I can put more energy into a couple important things, into my wife's birthday, which is mid-November, which I never get to fully like prioritize, and to Halloween, which is always fun, but which is like, okay, I'm a maker. I could do awesome stuff for Halloween, but I'm already really busy. I can't do another crazy thing. So birthday, Halloween, Thanksgiving, that's going to be a little bit different going forward, is one of the things I've had to really prioritize for myself and for the family.
Jeff, I know reInvent is one of the things that you look forward to. And before I wrap up this, what is a couple of things? And I hate to say one thing because there's so much here. I absolutely, this is like the Super Bowl week for me. I love coming out here, the community and everything. But what are some of the things that you look forward to when you come out to reInvent?
Let's see. I love to meet people, and I love to meet folks that are new to AWS, but or folks that have been coming to reInvent for 5, 7, 10 years. I get to finally meet colleagues in person. Quite often, when we are working on these new blog posts, it's a pretty intense kind of intimate situation where we're going back and forth on a lot of details, and we're going word by word, and we're all stressed and we're all stretched trying to make all this happen. And we've been through a little bit of a struggle together. It's great to actually be able to meet these people face to face and kind of exchange a bit of a war story about what it was like for each of us. So I love to meet colleagues and to meet fans and customers and so forth. Things that I always enjoy are the game days where we have hundreds of people get together. I think there's 8 or 10 different game day events through the course of the week. They get together, they're given an online challenge, they form small teams, they go through a set of problem solving exercises, they have to name their team with some cool, crazy name, and they get to solve problems together. Sometimes people show up having already formed a 4-player team. Other times they will form a team because they all just happen to sit at the table together. It's really cool to watch the dynamics of that. So I think the game days are really, really neat. I love the expos. I love in the expo, we've got the builder fair where my colleagues build really awesome stuff powered by AWS. That's often some kind of like tech electromechanical combination, and they show it off and show that their skills at architecting and building cool stuff as well. Just the sheer variety of what's happening here. It never ceases to be mind blowing. All the amazing things that we get to see and experience during the week.
I think the expo is huge this year, like bigger. I mean, they moved to registration and then to the swag. And then when you go into the expo, I think everybody really took a lot more time into making their booths in the studio just they feel so good. Like, it's so nice to be back into the expo. So nice to meet people. I literally just go in and just walk around.
I just wander at random and just see what I can see, and I
Say
love to meet
hello,
people.
take pictures. You know, it's
Oh yeah, the selfie phenomenon at reInvent is always fun, and
guilty.
to log in to LinkedIn and see all these really fun selfies of some with yourself and tons with other folks. It's just a really cool way to personalize what's going on here. So it sounds like a tech conference, and there's plenty of tech, but this just interpersonal connection and communication and getting to meet people face to face that you only connected with online, you can't overestimate how valuable that is.
Including you got a selfie with buckets. I saw
I
you
did,
know,
yeah.
jumping in. I gotta find buckets. Every year I usually do and get
My
all,
last selfie, I got 800 and something thousand impressions on that one. So it's like I'm not measured or judged on any metrics, but it's always cool when you do something like that. That is almost an incidental selfie, an incidental post, and it just blows up. It's like, wow, that's kind of cool. I'm
you
glad
weren't even
people care.
planning it. You weren't like, hey, this one, I want this one to be like 1 million views. You just said, you know what, this is fun. I'm just gonna
The
post
thing
it.
that I've learned about social media is that you can't learn anything because everything that you try is a one-off experiment that
Yep.
can depend on the time of day, the day of the week, the randomness of the algorithms on your platform that decide to promote you or not promote you.
Yep.
You just do a lot of really cool stuff and hope that some of it actually sticks and gets voted up. And if not, well, you do another thing.
Jeff, I hope we don't see the purple hair anytime soon. I hope you don't. So I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to it. Maybe one day you'll come in to reInvent normally and then all of a sudden dye it over in a strip and then surprise everybody.
We'll have to say now. There are times, and there are times when it's kind of late at night, and it's just a week before, and you're like, wow, this is really hard, and I don't know how many more times I can actually do this. And it's like, okay, this could be it. I'm
Yep.
too old and too exhausted to do it. But then you come here and you're reinvigorated. It's like, this is so fun and so cool, and how could I ever possibly step away from this? So maybe they're going to be wheeling me up on stage when I'm like 94 years old. We'll have to see. So
Sorry, I was envisioning like, don't give up, do it. I think all of us will help you in any which way capacity. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
absolutely, been blessed, John.
Yeah, this has been a pleasure. All right, everybody, this has been the Jon Myer podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because we're out of here.